The shift supervisor looked at the man in the worn leather jacket and laughed. "Look," he said, loud enough for the whole restaurant to hear. "I don't care who you used to be. I don't care what magazine you were on the cover of. In here, you're just another guy who needs to wait his turn like everyone else. Step aside." Behind the counter, the woman at register 4 stopped breathing a second, because she had recognized the man the moment he walked through the front door. She had recognized him from the framed photograph on the wall of the break room. The photograph her supervisor walked past every single morning and apparently never looked at. She knew exactly who he was. She knew exactly what was about to happen. The man did not step aside. He did not raise his voice. He just looked at the supervisor for a long second and said one quiet sentence. "I'd like to speak with the woman at the register, please." What the supervisor could not have known, what he was about to discover in the worst possible way, was that the man he had just dismissed was the largest individual investor in the company that signed its paychecks. Within 48 hours, that supervisor's career would be over. Stay with us, because the moment Brett Harmon understood what he had just done is one you do not want to miss. His name was Keanu Reeves. And in the past 4 years, since he had begun stepping back from the kind of acting work that consumed entire seasons of his life, he had been doing something quieter. He had been investing in companies he believed in. Not loudly, not publicly in the way some people make their second acts public, with press releases and corporate titles and self-congratulatory podcasts about the next chapter. Just consistently, carefully, in small businesses and regional chains run by people who, in his judgment, treated their employees like full human beings rather than line items in a margin report. He had taken some criticism for this from people in his industry who thought he should be doing something more visible with his money. Something with his name on it. A foundation. Maybe. A production company. The kind of investment that generated articles. He had ignored the criticism. He had spent enough of his life having his name attached to things to know that the most useful version of his money was the version that did not need his name attached at all. The money he had put into Summit Burger 4 years ago was not an act of vanity. It was an act of trust. He had read the materials Walter Greer had sent him. He had visited 2 locations. He had watched Walter speak with employees. He had decided that this was a man who deserved support, and that supporting him was worth doing whether anyone ever knew about it or not. Summit Burger was one of those investments. He had become a stakeholder 4 years ago through a private holding arrangement with Walter Greer, the founder, who had built Summit Burger from a single location in San Marcos, Texas, into a regional chain of 19 locations across Texas and Louisiana. Walter believed that the people who worked in his restaurants were not interchangeable parts. He believed it the way some people believe in religion. Quietly, completely, without performance. Keanu had believed in Walter. Walter had been on the cover of the company's annual newsletter 3 years ago, shaking Keanu's hand. It was a wide, warm photograph taken at the opening of the company's 20th location, with both men standing in front of the new restaurant in matching grins. The photograph had run inside as well, with a caption identifying both men by name and a paragraph of text underneath explaining the significance of the investment. Every Summit Burger employee received that newsletter when they were hired. It was also framed and hung in the break room at every location, alongside the original mission statement Walter had taped to the wall in 1991, including the Austin North location, where Brett Harmon had been the shift supervisor for 14 months, where Brett Harmon had walked past that framed newsletter every single day on his way to his office, and where Brett Harmon, on the Tuesday afternoon Keanu walked through the front door, did not look up from his clipboard long enough to recognize the man whose face was on the wall behind him. That, in a way, was the whole story. The thing Brett did not know about himself was that he had stopped looking. Not at the photograph. He had stopped looking at people. He had stopped, somewhere in the last 14 months, registering the human faces in the rooms he walked through. because registering them required him to acknowledge that they had interior lives, and acknowledging that they had interior lives was incompatible with the management style he had built. So he had simply stopped seeing. And the man who walked through the front door of his restaurant on a Tuesday afternoon was just another customer to him. The first person to look up was Diane. She was on register, 6 years into her tenure at this location, and her eyes lifted at the sound of the bell above the door the way they always did. She saw him. Her hand stopped moving on the screen, just for a second. Long enough that the customer in front of her glanced at her face to check whether something was wrong. She finished the order with steady hands and a steady voice. She handed the customer their receipt. She watched in her peripheral vision as Keanu walked toward her register. She knew exactly who he was. Everyone who had worked at Sump Burger for more than 2 months knew exactly who he was. The newsletter was on the wall. He had visited 2 locations in the past 4 years, both times with Walter, both times briefly, both times in the same worn jacket and jeans. He was not famous to her in the way movie stars are usually famous. He was famous to her in the more specific way of being a person whose name was attached to her paycheck. A person Walter trusted. A person who had, several years ago, helped fund the renovation that gave their break room a real coffee machine. She watched him approach. She also watched Brett. Brett was at the back of the restaurant, near the corridor to his office, looking at his clipboard. He was always looking at his clipboard when he was not actively making someone uncomfortable. The clipboard was a prop. It allowed him to perform business without producing any actual work. Keanu reached the counter. "Good afternoon," Diane said. Her voice had the careful steadiness she had developed over the past 14 months. The steadiness of someone who had learned that any noticeable change in her demeanor, a smile too warm, a moment of unprofessional pleasure, could be flagged and used against her. She had learned that the hard way. "Good afternoon," Keanu said. He looked at her name tag, Diane. "Could I get a cheeseburger and a coffee, please?" She was already entering the order. She did not say his name. She did not need to. The exchange of names was something they could leave for a moment when Brett was not in the building. That was the moment. Diane started counting how long it had been since Brett had walked through her area, and estimating how long it would be until he walked through again. She did this several times an hour, every shift she worked. The mental clock had become automatic. The way you keep track of weather when you live somewhere with bad weather. Not actively. Constantly. She had not, she realized later, stopped to think about why she was doing it. The point of the mental clock was that it freed her to focus on the rest of the job. As long as she could feel where Brett was in the building, she could process customers, make change, refill the napkin dispensers, and do all of it without the constant low-grade anxiety of not knowing. She had developed this skill, like every other survival skill in the building, slowly and without noticing. Cooper, behind her at the drink station, did not have the mental clock yet. He was 23. He had been at this job for 8 months. He was still in the phase of not yet understanding that the survival skill was necessary, which meant that he was the most likely person on any given shift to do something accidentally that drew Brett's attention. That was the moment Cooper, the young man at the drink station, knocked over a stack of cup lids. It was not dramatic. Maybe 20 plastic lids hit the floor. Cooper bent immediately to pick them up. He did not look up at anyone. He did not say anything. He just gathered the lids with the efficient head-down precision of someone who had learned to make small mistakes invisible as quickly as possible. But Brett had heard. Brett crossed the floor. "Cooper," he said. His voice was not loud. He had stopped being loud in the last several months because he had discovered that quiet was more effective. "How many times this week?" "I'll get them," Cooper said. "That wasn't my question." Cooper continued picking up lids. His ears had gone red. "3 times this week," Brett said, answering his own question. 3. We talked about this on Friday. Do you remember the conversation we had on Friday?" "Yes. And what did I tell you on Friday?" Cooper finished gathering the lids. He stood up holding them in both hands. He looked at the prep counter and not at Brett. That if it kept happening, you'd reduce my hours, he said. That if it kept happening, I'd reduce your hours. Yes. Brett let the silence sit. I'll be looking at next week's schedule tonight. He walked away. Cooper stood holding the lids. His shoulders were doing the small, specific things shoulders do when a person is working very hard to not let any feeling show in their body. Keanu had watched the whole thing. He had watched it standing at the register, with his order half entered, with Diane in front of him whose hands had stopped moving again. He turned and looked at Brett. Brett had returned to his post near the corridor and was looking at his clipboard. Keanu said calmly, "Excuse me." Brett did not look up. "Excuse me," Keanu said again. Same volume, same calm. The kind of calm that had a particular weight to it, the weight of someone who has learned over decades that you do not need to raise your voice to be heard. You need to be willing to wait. Brett looked up. He looked at Keanu the way Brett looked at any customer who was interrupting his important clipboard time. Mildly annoyed, slightly inconvenienced. The look of a man who had decided at some point that the customers were the obstacle to running the restaurant rather than the reason it existed. He did not recognize him. That, again, was the thing. The newsletter was on the wall in his break room. He had walked past it every day for 14 months. The face was right there in front of him now. And Brett's brain, having long ago categorized the worth of any given person by the visible markers of their authority, the suit, the tie, the corporate badge, looked at the worn jacket and the jeans and the unshaven face and processed. Low priority. Yes? Brett said. That young man dropped some cup lids, Keanu said. His voice was even. He picked them up immediately. There was no harm done. Brett's expression shifted, not to anger. To the specific patient condescension he reserved for people he believed were beneath him telling him how to do his job. I appreciate the input, he said, in the specific patient voice he used with customers who were trying to insert themselves into operational decisions. But this is between me and my employee. He waited for Keanu to take the hint and step back. Keanu did not step back. He's a person, Keanu said. The words came out evenly, without confrontation. Just the plain assertion of a fact. Not just an employee. Something flickered briefly across Brett's face. A small involuntary tightening around the eyes, the expression of a man who had just been told, in his own restaurant, that his framing of a situation was wrong. By a customer. With a long-haired jeans and jacket aesthetic that Brett had filed under low priority within the first 3 seconds of seeing him. Brett did not like being corrected. He especially did not like being corrected publicly. He laughed. Not loudly. Just a short, dismissive exhale that was meant to communicate, to anyone listening, that he was being patient with someone who did not understand the realities of running a business. Look, he said. I don't know who you are. I don't care who your agent says you are. I don't care what magazine you were on the cover of. In here, you're just another guy who needs to wait his turn like everyone else. Step aside, please. Let the line move. He gestured at the registers, where there was no line. He had, in his peripheral vision, seen the long hair and the leather jacket. He had filed Keanu, somewhere in the back of his mind, as the type. Some kind of musician or actor or other indulgent professional whose self-importance was probably enormous and whose actual standing in the world was probably negligible. He did not register the face. He did not register the framed photograph behind him. He just dismissed. Keanu did not step aside. He did not raise his voice. He did not flash a card or pull out a phone or do any of the things that men with leverage do when they want to communicate that they have leverage. He just stood there for a long second and looked at Brett and said one quiet sentence. I'd like to speak with the woman at the register, please. Brett rolled his eyes, actually, visibly rolled his eyes, and gestured at Diane in the universal gesture of get this guy out of my hair. He walked back toward his office. He did not see Diane go very still. He did not see Cooper behind the drink station, looking at Keanu with the dawning expression of someone who was beginning to understand something. He did not see Alex, working the kitchen line through the pass-through window, set down his spatula. Brett saw none of it because Brett had stopped seeing. Diane finished the order. She handed Keanu his receipt. He thanked her. Then he walked to a corner booth, sat down, and waited for his food. Diane, for the first time in 14 months, allowed a small smile to reach her eyes. She knew what was about to happen. She just did not know how or when, or how bad it was going to be for Brett. She was about to find out. Keanu was on his second cup of coffee when he caught Diane's eye and tilted his head, slightly, towards the seat across from him in the booth. It was the slow part of the afternoon. The lunch rush had ended. The dinner crowd had not yet started arriving. Brett had retreated to his office to do whatever Brett did in his office, which Diane had long ago concluded involved very little actual work and a significant amount of personal social media browsing. Diane glanced toward the back corridor. The corridor was empty. She walked over and sat down across from Keanu. She had not said his name yet. He had not said hers beyond what was on her name tag. But the moment she sat down, the formal distance between them collapsed into something simpler. "Mr. Reeves," she said quietly. "Keanu, please." "Mr. Reeves," she said it again softer. Then she allowed herself one small, dry sentence. "He really has no idea, does he?" "No," Keanu said. "He really doesn't." She almost laughed. It was the first thing that had come close to a real laugh in her face in months. She caught it and held it back. Professional reflex, but Keanu saw it, and something in him eased slightly. "How long has he been doing this?" Keanu asked. She did not need him to specify what this was. 14 months, she said. Maybe a little less. He came in around the time Mr. Greer's diagnosis was announced internally. "I don't think that's a coincidence." "I don't either," Keanu said. Diane looked at her hands. "I don't know what to tell you," she said. "I don't want to be the person who complains. I don't want to be the person who makes things worse. I just—" She stopped, took a small breath. "I just wanted you to know that you're not crazy. What you saw with Cooper, that's not unusual. That's a normal Tuesday." "I figured," Keanu said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he said gently, "Diane, what's happening to you, specifically?" She was quiet for a long second. She had not been asked that question by anyone in this building who could do anything about the answer. Walter had been gone, focused on his treatment. Gary Hollis, the regional director, came through twice a year and asked Brett how things were going. Brett told him things were going well. Gary believed Brett. Gary had no incentive to believe anything else. Nobody had asked Diane what was happening to her. She reached into her apron pocket, took out her phone. "I have a picture," she said, "of the schedule from this week, and I have my deposit records for the past 9 months. Would you like to see them?" "Yes," Keanu said. She turned the screen. The schedule first. Her name on Tuesday. 5 hours. He had been here when she clocked in. He had been here for 6 hours already, and her shift was nowhere near done. 5 hours scheduled, Diane said quietly. "I'm going to work 12. Brett enters the official hours into the payroll system at the end of the week. He uses a custom rounding protocol that he created for this location. It's not in any other Summit Burger location. The rounding always goes against the employee. Always." She swiped to the deposit records. The shortfalls were highlighted in red. Week after week, 3 hours short here, 4 hours short there. None of the gaps large enough to trigger an automated system flag. All of them, when added up, significant. "How much?" Keanu asked. "For me this year, about $2,400. That I can prove. There's probably more I can't prove because I didn't start tracking carefully until February." Keanu nodded slowly. "How many other employees?" he asked. "At this location?" 9, maybe 10. I can show you the names. Most of them don't track it the way I do. They feel like they must be misremembering their hours." That's how he got Cooper. Cooper is 23. He had never worked a real job before this one. He didn't know what he was supposed to be paid. He just trusted that the number on his deposit was right. Diane looked at the table. "What he's doing to Cooper isn't even the worst part," she said. "Cooper at least has parents he can call. Marcus, who works back of house, has a son with cerebral palsy. He needs every dollar Brett is taking. And he won't say anything because Brett told him 3 months ago that, quote, we were looking at his hours, unquote, and Marcus has been terrified ever since." She stopped. She had been holding this in for a long time. The relief of saying it out loud, even to one person, was visible in her face. "You don't have to keep holding all of this alone," Keanu said. She looked up. "That's the problem," she said. "I've been holding it alone because there was no one safe to give it to. Mr. Greer is sick. Gary Hollis is friends with Brett." The corporate hotline routes through Gary's office. Patricia Walsh tried to report something 18 months ago. She's at the Beaumont location now, doing assistant manager work for less than what she made before. Diane shrugged. "I am not stupid. I learned from Patricia. I don't go to channels. I document, and I wait for someone safe to come." She looked at him. "You're the first safe person who's walked through that door," she said. Keanu was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're going to give me everything you have. Photos, names, the deposit records, everything. You're going to send it to my phone before you leave this booth. And tomorrow morning, Walter Greer is going to know about all of it." Diane pressed her lips together and nodded. She started transferring files. Her hands were steady, steadier than they had been in months. She had spent so much of the past year managing her body to not betray what she was carrying that the act of letting it betray something now, the small visible release of weight, felt almost foreign. She had not told her husband most of this. She had told him some of it, the hours getting cut, the general tension at work. But she had not told him the specific weekly accounting she had been keeping. She had not told him about the deposit shortfalls. She had not told him about the night. She had stayed up until 3 in the morning organizing the photographs into folders by month, in case anyone ever asked. She had not told him because telling him would have made it real, and as long as it was not real, she had felt like she could still manage it on her own. She had been wrong about that. It had been real the whole time. She had just been carrying it alone. She was not going to be carrying it alone anymore. That was the thing about the man across the table from her. He was not just going to make a phone call. He was not just going to fix the situation. He was going to take the carrying of it from her, in the specific gentle way that good people take things from you when they realize you have been carrying them for too long. The relief of that, the simple physical relief of having someone else share the weight, was so large that for a moment she could not look at him directly. While she was doing it, she said, very quietly, "There's something else. Alex back of house has been keeping track of something different. Brett takes cash from the drawer after close. 3 Fridays in the past 8 weeks. Alex saw him each time. He has it written down." Keanu stopped. "Cash? Small amounts. $20, $30. Not enough to trigger the closing report alarm. Just enough to be obvious to anyone watching." Keanu thought about that. It was one thing to have a manager who was abusing scheduling power. That was a problem that resolved through HR and an audit. It was something else entirely to have a manager who was stealing cash from the register. That was a problem that resolved through criminal referral. Brett was about to discover that he had been doing both, in the same building, under the same security cameras, while dismissing the largest individual investor in the company. "Tell Alex," Keanu said, "that I would like to speak with him before the end of his shift. Not at the counter, by the dumpsters, where the back camera doesn't reach. He'll find a reason to take out the trash," Diane said. Good. Alex was not surprised. That was the first thing. He had recognized Keanu from the moment Keanu walked in, just as Diane had. He had been waiting, in the slow, accumulating way that you wait for something when you don't know you're waiting for it, to see whether this was going to be the day. He had thought about it the way you think about things you have planned for, without admitting that you have planned for them. He had thought, several times in the past 9 months, if Keanu Reeves ever walks into this building, I am going to give him the notebook. He had not said this thought out loud, even to himself. He had let it sit in the back of his mind as a kind of contingency, a backup plan he hoped he would never need. He needed it now. It turned out you do not always get to know in advance what kind of person is going to walk through your door on any given Tuesday. It was the day. He met Keanu by the dumpsters at 4:45, took a cigarette he did not smoke from his pocket and held it as a prop, and handed Keanu a small spiral notebook in the same motion. It's all in there, Alex said. 3 Fridays, times, approximate amounts, what he was wearing, where I was standing when I saw him. I figured if I ever needed to give it to someone, the more details the better. You were right, Keanu said. Alex shrugged. The shrug of a man who had been right about something for 9 months without anyone caring. I don't want to be a manager, Alex said. I don't want a promotion. I don't want anything. I just want this guy out of my building. That is going to happen, Keanu said. Alex looked at him for a long moment. Mr. Reeves, he said, I'm not naive. I've been at this company 9 years. I've watched a lot of people who deserved consequences not get them because the people above them made no calculations about whether the consequences would be inconvenient. Plainly, are you going to actually do something? Or are you going to thank me for the notebook and disappear and let Brett find out about it from Gary? Keanu held his eyes. Walter Greer is going to be in this building at 7:30 tomorrow morning, he said. With his CFO, with his employment attorney. Brett is going to be terminated in his own office, in front of all of you. And Gary Hollis is going to be terminated by phone an hour later. The Department of Labor is going to be informed. The Austin Police Department is going to be informed about the cash. None of you are going to lose hours over what happened in this building. None of you are going to face consequences for talking to me. I am personally guaranteeing you that. Alex was quiet. All right, he said. All right, all right. Alex put the unsmoked cigarette back in his pocket. I believe you. Don't make me regret it. I won't, Keanu said. He went back inside. He paid for his coffee and his burger. He walked out the front door of Summit Burger Austin North without looking at Brett, who was once again looking at his clipboard, and who did not look up. That was the last interaction Brett Harmon would have with Keanu Reeves before knowing who he was. He had no idea. Walter Greer arrived at 7:27 the next morning. The drive from the airport had taken him 26 minutes. He had not slept on the flight, but he had not tried to. He had spent the flight reviewing the documentation Keanu had sent at midnight, organized into a folder by Sandra Pryor before they boarded, and his face, during suching that review, had progressed through several stages that the flight attendant had quietly avoided interrupting. He came with Sandra and with James Whitaker, his employment attorney of 15 years. He did not look like a man who had been fighting cancer for 18 months. He looked like a man who had been waiting for permission to be angry about something for a long time, and had just been given that permission in writing. That was the thing about Walter. He had a long fuse. He had run a regional chain for 32 years without firing more than a handful of people, because he believed that most management problems came from systemic failures rather than individual ones. And most individual failures came from people who could be coached if you were willing to coach them. He had been wrong about Brett. He had relied on Gary Hollis to read his branch managers, and Gary had relied on Brett's numbers, and the entire chain of reasoning had collapsed because nobody at any level had stopped to ask whether the numbers were being produced honestly. Walter had been thinking about this on the plane. He had been thinking specifically about Patricia Walsh. The transfer to Beaumont, the form letter Gary had sent him at the time, framing it as a development opportunity. Walter had signed off on the transfer without reading it carefully because he had been 3 weeks into chemotherapy and barely able to keep his attention on his own breathing. He had failed Patricia. He had failed Diane and Cooper and Alex and the 6 other employees at Austin North, whose names Sandra had highlighted in the folder. He could not undo that failure. But he could spend whatever time he had left being awake to it. Keanu was already in the parking lot. They went in through the front door, all 4 of them, at 7:30 exactly. The morning prep crew was setting up. Marcus, the back-of-house worker whose son had cerebral palsy, was laying out trays. Cooper was at the drink station. Diane was at the register, watching the door. She looked up. Walter walked across the dining area toward her. The walk of a man who built this company from one location and had not been in this building in 8 months and was, this morning, taking it back. Diane, Walter said. He had remembered her name from the photographs Keanu had sent him at midnight. Would you walk back to Brett's office with me, please? And Alex? And Cooper. I'd like you all to be present. Mr. Greer, Diane said. Her voice was steady. Are we? Is this safe? It is now, Walter said. Brett came out of his office at 7:36, drawn by the sound of multiple voices in his restaurant, during a time when there should have been one. He saw Walter. He saw Sandra Pryor, whose face was familiar from the corporate website. He saw James Whitaker, who he did not recognize but whose role he could read from posture and presence and the laptop bag. He saw Diane and Alex and Cooper standing in a small group near the corridor. And then he saw Keanu, in the morning light, without the worn jacket on, just in a faded gray shirt. Not unrecognizable now. Not in this combination of people. Not in his own employer's restaurant. Not in this exact context, where context made identity unmissable. Brett's face went through 3 colors in 2 seconds. The first was confusion. The second was the careful neutrality he had now practiced for management situations he did not yet understand. The third was the specific drained pallor of a person who was beginning to understand exactly who was standing in front of him and exactly who was standing next to that person. His mouth opened. It took him a moment to produce sound. Mr. Greer, he said. His voice had jumped half an octave higher than its usual register. I didn't know you were. When did you? You didn't know, Walter agreed quietly. He let the word sit there for a moment because he wanted Brett to feel its full weight. Walter had not flown to Austin to argue. He had flown to Austin to deliver a verdict. There is a great deal you didn't know, Brett, including who you spoke to yesterday afternoon when you told him to step aside. Brett looked at Keanu. The recognition arrived in stages. First, a kind of confused mismatch, the brain refusing to reconcile the worn jacket dismissal of the previous afternoon with the framed photograph on the break room wall. Then, the specific physical sensation of a stomach dropping. Then, the face of a man who has just understood, in the worst possible moment of understandings, what he has done. He did not speak. There was nothing to say. My office, Walter said. Now, they went into Brett's office. Sandra Pryor sat down with her laptop. James Whitaker took the chair beside her. Walter sat down across from where Brett would sit. Keanu remained standing near the door. Diane, Alex, and Cooper stood together against the back wall. Fred sat. Sandra opened the laptop. We are going to walk through the documentation in 3 parts, Walter said. His voice was the calm of a man who had decided exactly how this conversation was going to go and was no longer interested in being surprised. First, your scheduling and payroll manipulations over the past 14 months. Second, the cash discrepancies on 3 specific Friday nights. Third, the framework under which your employment with Summit Burger is going to be terminated this morning. He paused. You may speak when I ask you a direct question. Otherwise, please listen. Brett nodded. He had no fight left. Whatever performance he had been about to attempt. Denial, deflection, the suggestion that there was some misunderstanding here, had been killed in the dining room when he saw Keanu Reeves standing next to Walter Greer. The first part took 20 minutes. Sandra walked through the data with the patient precision of someone who had been preparing this presentation for several hours overnight. Hours scheduled versus hours worked by employee over 14 months. The custom rounding protocol that Brett had implemented and that did not exist at any other Summit Burger location. The cumulative wage shortfall across 9 employees, $31,000 and change, by Sandra's preliminary count. There would be more. The forensic accountants Walter was retaining would find the rest. Brett listened without speaking. The second part took 6 minutes. James Whitaker placed a folder on the desk. Inside the folder were 3 printed stills from the security camera footage Sandra had pulled overnight. 3 Friday nights. 3 different angles. Brett opening the cash drawer after close. Brett removing cash. Brett pocketing it, the corresponding closing reports, showing no entry. Brett looked at the folder. He did not deny anything. The third part took 2 minutes. Effective immediately, Walter said. Your employment with Summit Burger is terminated for cause. James will walk you through the legal documentation. The wage manipulation will be referred to the Department of Labor today. The cash discrepancies will be referred to the Austin Police Department this afternoon. James will explain the personal civil liability you may face above and beyond any criminal exposure. You will be escorted from this property within the hour. Walter paused. Gary Hollis will receive a separate phone call at 9. His termination will be processed by end of business today. Brett opened his mouth. Walter said, "I am not finished." Brett closed his mouth. "You walked past a photograph of me, shaking Keanu Reeves' hand every day for 14 months, Walter said. "It is mounted on the wall of the break room 6 feet from your office door. You made a habit of not looking at it because looking at it would have required you to think about people other than yourself. Yesterday afternoon, the man in that photograph stood in your dining room and watched you intimidate a 23-year-old over 20 plastic cup lids. He is the largest individual investor in this company. He has known me for 17 years, and he has been more upset about what happened to Cooper Williams than about anything else he has seen in this building." Brett was looking at the desk. "You did not fail to recognize him," Walter said. "You failed to look. Those are not the same thing. The first is bad luck. The second is a moral choice you have been making every day for 14 months, and the moral choice you have been making has now cost you everything you built here." Brett's hands had begun to shake slightly. "You have one chance," Walter said, "to say something useful in this room before James walks you through the paperwork. You may say it now, or you may say nothing at all." A long pause. Brett started. His voice broke. He cleared it, started again. "I'm sorry. I am sorry. I knew what I was doing was. I knew it was. I told myself it was efficiency. I told myself the numbers mattered. I told myself." He stopped. Looked at Diane against the back wall, at Cooper, at Alex. "I told myself you were all numbers," he said. "And I knew you weren't. I just found ways to not say it." He looked at the desk again. "Cooper, I'm sorry," he said. His voice had broken slightly on the apology. "I owe you for the lids, and I owe you for a lot more than that." Cooper said nothing. He did not say nothing because he was being cruel. He said nothing because he was 23. And the man who had threatened his livelihood 8 different times in 8 months was now apologizing to him in a small office while the founder of the company watched. And Cooper did not have the emotional vocabulary to respond to that situation. So he just stood there, quietly, the way he had been standing in this building for 8 months. "Diane," Brett said, "I'm sorry." Diane said nothing. Diane said nothing because she had spent 14 months not speaking in this office, and the muscle memory of not speaking was stronger in this exact moment than the desire to say anything at all. Alex said nothing. Alex said nothing because Alex was the kind of man who had decided, a long time ago, that there was no apology that mattered as much as a behavior change, and he was waiting to see what Brett actually did rather than what he said. Brett's words, at this point in his life, were not currency Alex had any use for. The silence in the room was not theatrical. It was the specific silence of 3 people who had spent 14 months being stripped of the right to speak in this office, and who were not, in this moment, ready to give Brett the absolution he was reaching for. They did not owe him absolution. Absolution was not something other people gave you. It was something you spent the rest of your life earning, and Brett had not earned anything yet. Walter nodded slowly. "Take him through the paperwork, James," he said. He stood, walked over to Diane, Cooper, Alex. The 3 of them watched him approach with the careful watchfulness of people who had not been treated like the protagonists of any story in this building for a long time, and who were not entirely sure what was about to happen. Walter looked at them. For a moment, he could not get any words out. The cancer had taken something out of him that he had not fully gotten back. The anger that had carried him through the meeting with Brett had been a kind of fuel, and now that it was no longer needed, he could feel the exhaustion beneath it. But this was the part that mattered. "Would you all sit down with me for a moment in the dining room, please?" They sat at a 4-top near the window. Walter, Diane, Cooper, Alex. Keanu pulled up a chair from the next table. Sandra remained in Brett's office with James, finalizing the paperwork. Brett would be escorted out of the building in approximately 40 minutes. None of the four people at this table needed to watch that happen, and none of them had asked to. Walter looked at the three of them. "I am going to say several things," he said, "and I would like you to hear all of them before any of you speak. Is that all right?" They nodded. "First, I am sorry. What happened to you in this building over the past 14 months happened under my ownership, with my name on the wall, and even though I did not know it was happening, the not knowing was itself a form of failure. I should have known. I will be making changes to ensure that the next time something like this is happening in any of my locations, it does not take 14 months and the visit of a famous investor to surface it. That work begins this week." He paused. "Second, every dollar that Brett took from your paychecks will be returned to you, with interest, calculated by Sandra's team within 30 days. Your employment records will be expunged of every write-up that traces back to this 14-month period. The personnel files will reflect what should have been documented all along, which is that the three of you and the other 6 employees who were affected were doing your jobs well under a manager who was abusing his authority." He paused again. "Third, Cooper. Look at me." Cooper looked up. He was 23. His ears were red again, but for a different reason now. Walter Greer was looking directly at him with the full attention of a man who had built a regional restaurant chain from nothing and was in this moment treating Cooper as if Cooper were the most important person in the room. "You did not deserve what happened to you yesterday," Walter said. "You did not deserve what has been happening to you for the months before that. You are a young man trying to figure out how to be good at a job. The way you respond to dropping a stack of cup lids is to pick them up. That is the entirety of the correct response. There is no other correct response that anyone in this company is entitled to demand from you." Cooper's mouth moved. He didn't say anything. "I would like to offer you an apprenticeship," Walter said. 6 months, full benefits, paid at the assistant manager rate, working directly with whoever I bring in to run this location going forward. At the end of 6 months, you and I will have a conversation about whether you want to stay in restaurant management. If you don't, we will help you transition to whatever you actually want to do, including paying for the relevant training. If you do, we will talk about a specific path forward." Cooper's eyes had gone wet. He was not crying. He was a young man with 23 years of practice, not crying in front of people who had power over him. The practice had started young. It had started before he could remember. There had been many people in his life with power over him, and crying in front of them had never produced a useful result. And so he had simply learned not to do it. But his eyes were wet. He looked at Walter. He looked at Diane. He looked at Alex. He looked at Keanu. He looked Baxter Greer. "I don't," his voice broke. He stopped. He tried again. "I don't know what to say. Take a breath," Walter said gently. "You do not have to answer right now. Take a week. Talk to your family. Come back to me with whatever feels right. There is no pressure here. The offer is real, and it will still be there a week from now." Cooper nodded. He could not speak. That was all right. The not speaking, in this room, in this moment, was a different kind of silence than the silence Cooper had been carrying for 8 months at this job. This silence was full of something. The other silence had been empty. Walter saw the difference. He had built a company over 32 years, and one of the things he had learned was how to read silences. He gave Cooper the silence he needed, and he did not try to fill it with anything else. Walter turned to Alex. "I understand you do not want a promotion. That's right. Then I am not going to offer you one. What I am going to offer you is a 15% raise, a recognition bonus equivalent to 3 months of pay for what you have provided to this company through the last 9 months of careful documentation, and a written acknowledgement in your file that the integrity of this company at this location was preserved by you. You may keep doing exactly the job you are doing. You will simply do it for what you should have been making all along, and with the gratitude of the founder of this company on the record." Quiet. For a moment. Then he said, simply, "Thank you, Mr. Greer. That's more than fair." Walter nodded. He turned to Diane. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Calloway, he said finally, I have read the documentation you sent to Mr. Reeves last night. Every photo, every record, every annotated note. I want to tell you something directly. The work you did over the past 14 months, the documentation, the protection of the people around you, the absorption of pressure that you should never have had to absorb. That work prevented this situation from becoming much worse than it became. There are 6 other employees in this building whose lives you protected by holding the line. I want you to know that I see that. And I want you to know that everyone in this company is going to know that, because I am going to make sure they do. Diane's hands were folded on the table. Her knuckles were white. I am creating a position, Walter said. Director of Field Advocacy. The role exists for one purpose: to be a direct protected channel between a Summit Burger employee and my office. No regional director in between. No HR filter. Direct. The role will have authority to investigate any concern, to recommend any remedy, and to escalate to me personally. The role will be based at corporate but will spend 1 week per month in the field, in our locations, talking to our people. He paused. I want you to take the role. Diane looked at him. She did not say anything. I know you do not have formal management training, Walter said. I do not need you to have formal management training. I need you to have what you have already proven you have: the understanding, from the inside, of what it feels like when the system fails the people it is supposed to protect. The willingness to do something about it even when it is not your job. The judgment to know what is real and what is not. You have all of those things. I will provide you with everything else: training, support, a budget, a team. You will not be doing this alone. He paused. And I am asking because I know what the alternative looks like. The alternative is that I hire someone from a corporate human resources background, who has never worn an apron in their life, who has never had a manager threaten their livelihood for asking for a schedule change, and who will do the role in the safest, most defensible, most useless way available. I am tired of that being how companies handle this. I want someone who knows what it feels like to be the person on the other end of what just happened in this building. Diane's eyes were very still. Mr. Greer, she said. Her voice was steady, but only barely. I have to think about it. My husband is still recovering. I would need to know what the schedule looks like, whether I can still be home in the evenings. Whether the role is whatever schedule works for your life, Walter said. I will design it around you. I am not interested in losing you to logistics. Diane nodded. She was crying now, quietly. The professional steadiness she had built over 14 months was holding the shape of her face, but not the surface of it. Thank you, she said. Yes. The answer is yes. I just need to work out the details. We will work them out together, Walter said. He looked at all 3 of them. The last thing I want to say to all of you, he said, is something I should have been saying every quarter for the past 5 years and was not. You are not interchangeable. You are not staffing levels. You are not labor cost. You are the entire reason this company exists. The food we serve is good because of the people in our kitchens. The customers come back because of the people at our registers. The buildings are clean because of the people who clean them. Every dollar this company makes flows through your hands first. Anyone who forgets that is not running a Smutburger location. They are running something else with our name on it, and I am going to spend whatever years I have left making sure no one forgets it again. Diane was openly crying now. Cooper had given up trying to keep his eyes dry. Alex, who had been at this company for 9 years and had seen Walters at his best and watched him disappear and now seen him return, was looking at the table with the specific composed quietness of a man who had been waiting for something for a very long time and was now, finally, allowed to receive it. Keanu was watching them all. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Brett Harmon was escorted from the property at 9:14. He walked out the back door, carrying a small box of personal items, with a private security officer Walter had hired for the morning walking 3 steps behind him. He did not look at any of his former employees. He did not look at Walter or Keanu or Sandra or James. He looked at the asphalt in front of his shoes. He drove home. In the car, he sat in his driveway for 40 minutes before going inside. The professional career he had spent 15 years building was over. The Department of Labor case would take 6 months to resolve and would conclude with a finding of willful wage theft and a personal financial penalty. The Austin Police Department case would take longer and would conclude with a misdemeanor plea and a 1-year suspended sentence. He would never work in restaurant management again. The industry was not large. His name would circulate. His reputation, once it became visible, would not recover. He sat in the car for a long time. He thought about Cooper, about the cup lids, about the fact that Cooper was 23 years old and made $9 an hour, and that he had threatened Cooper's hours over an accident that took 8 seconds to clean up. He thought about the look on Cooper's face when he had picked up the lids. He had not paid attention to the look at the time, because paying attention to it would have undermined the management style he had cultivated. But the look was there now, in his memory, in detail. A young man with red ears, working hard not to let his face show anything, doing the only thing in front of him to do, which was pick up the lids. Brett had reduced him for that. He had not just reduced him for the lids. He had reduced him for being 23 and inexperienced, and not yet hardened against the kind of supervisor Brett had become. He had taken a young man who was trying to figure out how to be good at his first real job, and he had used Cooper's earnestness against him. He had made earnestness into a weakness. He thought about Diane, about the way she had stood very still at the register every time he walked through her area. The way her hands moved on the screen with a particular careful precision, because she had learned that any visible mistake could be filed and used. The way she had stopped making eye contact with him somewhere in the past year because eye contact had stopped being safe. He had taken a 6-year employee who had once smiled at him on his first day and turned her into someone who avoided him. He had done it slowly, without articulating it to himself. The way you do anything you do not want to look at directly. He thought about the photograph in the break room. The photograph of Walter Greer shaking Keanu Reeves's hand. He had walked past it every day for 14 months. He had not looked at it. He had looked through it. He had categorized Keanu, in his memory, as the kind of decoration that founder-level investors put on a wall so employees would know to be suitably impressed. He had filed Keanu away as someone with no operational relevance to him. He had been wrong about every part of that. He had been wrong about Keanu specifically. Keanu had been actively involved in Summit Burger for 4 years. He was on a quarterly review call with Walter and the senior leadership team. He visited locations. He was, in every meaningful operational sense, present. And Brett, who prided himself on running a tight operation, had not known any of that. Because Brett had stopped doing the most basic thing a manager is supposed to do, which is to actually look at the people and the information in front of him. He had stopped looking somewhere along the way, because looking required effort, and because looking required him to acknowledge things that were inconvenient to acknowledge, and because looking might have required him at some point to face the truth that he had been turning into the kind of person he had once promised himself he would never become. He sat in the car for a long time. He thought about the man he had been at 25, working his way up through the management track at a different chain, actually believing, that the way you treated people determined the kind of business you ran. He could remember being 25 and feeling certain about that. He could not remember the moment he had stopped believing it. It had not been a single moment. It had been a long, gradual erosion. The first time he had cut corners on a schedule and not been caught. The second time, when not being caught had felt like efficiency. The 100th time, when not being caught had felt like skill. And then the framework he had built to justify all of it had become, somewhere along the way, the thing he believed, instead of the thing he had once believed. He did not have a redemption arc available to him. He had not earned one. He had walked past a photograph for 14 months and chosen not to look. He had told a young man that dropping cup lids was a fireable offense. He had taken cash from a register he did not own. He had stolen money from people whose names he knew, whose lives he had been close enough to see if he had been willing to look. He had been close enough. That was the thing. He had been physically close enough to all of them, every day, to see them as the full human beings they were. They had not been hiding from him. They had been right there. He had simply chosen, every day, not to look. What he had instead was the beginning of an understanding of who he had become, of what that had cost the people around him, of how completely he had failed to be the kind of manager he had once believed he could be. It was not redemption. It was just the first honest accounting he had done in 14 months. It was not nothing. He went inside the house. He started the long, slow work of being the person he was now going to have to become. 6 months later, Diane Calloway gave the opening address at the Summit Burger annual all-manager meeting. She wore a dark jacket and her name tag, which now read Director of N5E Advocacy. The room held 112 people, every store manager, every shift supervisor, every regional director, and the senior corporate leadership. She did not have notes. She had thought about preparing notes. Sandra had offered to help her draft remarks. Walter had offered to look at a draft. She had declined both offers, not because she was confident, but because she had decided that if she was going to give this speech, she was going to give it the way she would have wanted to hear it given 14 months ago. When she was working a register and thinking nobody at the corporate level had any idea what was happening to her, she would have wanted it given plainly. So she gave it plainly. "My name is Diane Calloway," she said. 6 months ago, I worked the register at the Austin North location for what I thought was 22 hours a week and was actually 38 hours a week. And the difference was being kept by a shift supervisor who had decided somewhere along the way that I was not really a person. She paused. I did not become director of field advocacy because I did anything special. I became director of field advocacy because I kept a record. I took photographs of the schedule with my phone. I screenshot my deposit records. I wrote down what I observed in a notes file that I backed up to my email. I did this not because I was brave. I did it because I was scared, and the only thing that helped me feel less scared was having proof that I was not imagining what was happening to me. She looked across the room. In the 6 months since I took this role, she said, I have received 31 direct reports from Summit Burger employees in 11 different locations. 22 of those reports turned out to involve real, actionable concerns. 3 involved minor misunderstandings that were resolved with a phone call. The other 6 are still under review. She paused. The reason I am telling you these numbers is not to alarm you. The reason I am telling you these numbers is to tell you that 19% of the locations represented in this room had something serious enough, that an employee took the personal risk of reporting it to a stranger at a corporate office. 19% in 6 months. And those are only the ones who reported. The actual percentage of locations with something going on is higher. The room was very still. You are all going to leave this meeting today, Diane said. And you are going to go back to your locations. Some of you are going to think about what I just said and look at your own management practices honestly and make some changes. Some of you are going to think about which of your employees might already be keeping records on you. I want you to hold that thought for a moment. I want you to imagine, specifically, that someone at your store has a notes file in their email titled with the date they started working for you, and that file contains the things you wish nobody was writing down. A small movement in the room. Not quite a flinch. The collective shift of people considering something they had not considered. Now, Diane said, I want you to imagine the alternative. I want you to imagine that nobody at your store is keeping that file. Not because they are not paying attention, but because there is nothing for them to write down. She paused. That is the whole job, she said. That is everything I have to teach you about management today. The job is to make yourself the kind of manager that nobody on your floor needs to keep records on. Everything else flows from that. In the back of the room, Walter Greer was watching Diane with the specific quiet attention of a man who had built his company once, watched it almost slip away, and was now watching it be rebuilt by someone he had hired 6 months ago to answer phones and document complaints. Beside him, Keanu was watching too. He did not say anything. He did not need to. Diane was finishing her remarks. "I want to leave you with one specific thing," she said. "There is a photograph that hangs in the break room of every Summit Burger location. It shows our founder, Walter Greer, shaking the hand of one of our investors, Mr. Keanu Reeves. The photograph has been there for several years. I want you to look at it the next time you walk past it. I want you to look at it, actually. I want you to think about the fact that the man on the right in that photograph stood in front of a shift supervisor at our Austin North location 7 months ago and was told to step aside because he was not important enough to bother with." A small ripple of recognition moved through the room. Most of them had heard the story in some form. None of them had heard it from her. That shift supervisor walked past that photograph every day for 14 months, Diane said. He did not see it, not because his eyes did not register it, because he had stopped looking at the people around him entirely. The framed photograph was just one of the people he had stopped looking at. The cashiers at his registers were others. The kid at the drink station. The cook on the line. The woman who cleaned the bathrooms. He stopped looking, and once he had stopped looking, the rest happened on its own. She took a small breath. "Look at the people in your buildings," she said. "All the time. Every day. That is the only management technique that actually matters. Everything else is just paperwork." She stepped back from the podium. For a moment, the room was completely silent. Then someone in the back, a manager from the Beaumont location, started to clap. Just one set of hands. Slow, steady. A second pair joined. A third. The applause that followed was not loud. It was sustained. The applause of a room of people who had just heard something they could not pretend they had not heard, and were deciding in real time what they were going to do with it. Some of them were applauding because they meant it. Some of them were applauding because they had to. Some of them were applauding because they had not yet decided how they felt, and applauding gave them another minute to figure it out. Diane did not need to know which was which. She had said what she had come to say. The rest was up to them. She stepped down from the small platform and walked to the back of the room, where Patricia Walsh was standing. Patricia had been transferred back from Beaumont 2 months ago, with a full apology from Walter and a promotion to district training coordinator. She was now responsible for onboarding every new manager Summit Burger hired across 19 locations. The work she was doing was, in some ways, the work she would have been doing if her original report 18 months ago had been handled correctly. She and Diane had become close in the past 2 months. Patricia put her hand on Diane's shoulder. "That was perfect," she said quietly. "It was honest," Diane said. "Same thing." Allowed herself a small smile. It reached her eyes as Walter clapped beside Keanu. Keanu clapped too. He thought about a Tuesday afternoon, about a young man kneeling on the floor of a restaurant, picking up cup lids while a supervisor with a clipboard made a small, unnecessary cruelty out of an accident. He thought about Diane standing at her register, watching it happen and not being able to stop it. He thought about Alex in the back of house, with a notebook in his locker. He thought about all the other Cooper Williamses and Diane Callaways and Alexes in all the other companies, in all the other towns where the photograph was on the wall, but nobody was looking. He thought about his mother. He always came back to his mother. She had worked in places like that. She had not had a Walter Greer. She had not had a Diane Callaway. She had just had the work itself, and a boy who watched her come home tired, and the slow private accumulation of things she did not say out loud because there was no point in saying them. He hoped, in some small way, that the work he had done in the past few years, the investments, the visits, the willingness to walk into a Summit Burger on a random Tuesday in worn jeans and watch what was happening, was something his mother somewhere knew about. He hoped she was proud. That was all. The truth about people is that the ones who treat you well when they think you do not matter are the ones who actually have character. Brett Harmon failed that test in his own restaurant. Diane Calloway passed it every day for 14 months, while it cost her 38 hours of weekly wages. Alex passed it 9 years deep in a kitchen, where he had no incentive to pass it, except that passing it was the only way he could look at himself in the mirror in the morning. Cooper Williams passed it at 23 years old by picking up cup lids that were not his fault and not making a scene about it. And Walter Greer, who was sick and tired and running a regional restaurant chain from the wrong side of a cancer treatment, passed it by trusting the right person at the right moment to walk through the door of a location he no longer had the strength to visit himself. The man who walked through that door was a man with money. He could have invested his money in many things. He had chosen to invest it in companies run by people he believed in. He had chosen, when one of those companies showed him a signal that something was going wrong, to go and see for himself. He had chosen, when he saw what was happening, to use the leverage that his money and his name and his relationship with Walter Greer gave him not to make a public spectacle, but to quietly and completely fix the problem. That is what wealth looks like when it is held by someone who remembers where they came from. He had not been famous to Brett Harmon because Brett Harmon had stopped looking. He had been famous to Diane Calloway, who had been looking the whole time because the photograph was on the wall, and her job had taught her that the people on the wall were sometimes the people who mattered most. The difference between Brett and Diane was the difference between a person who looks at others as obstacles to be managed and a person who looks at others as people who deserve to be seen. That is the whole story. Look at the people around you, all the time, even when you do not think they matter. Especially then. Because the truth about character is that it shows up when no one important is watching. And the truth about importance is that you almost never know who is watching at any given moment. The man in the worn leather jacket might be a movie star. He might be the largest individual investor in the company that signs your paycheck. Or he might just be a guy who needs a cheeseburger. It does not actually matter which. Treat him like a person. Treat all of them like people. The rest takes care of itself. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about authority. Authority is not a permanent gift. It is a temporary loan. People give you authority over them, over their schedules, their paychecks, their working conditions, their dignity, on the assumption that you will use that authority responsibly. The moment you stop using it responsibly, the loan is being called back. You may not know it is being called back. The people around you may not yet know how to call it back. But it is being called back every day, in small accumulated ways, in records being kept and notebooks being written and photographs being saved on phones. The question is not whether your authority will be revoked. The question is when, and by whom, and what you will have done with it before that happens. Brett Harmon had 14 months of authority at the Austin North Summit Burger. He used it to make people smaller. A woman kept records. A young man kept showing up. A line cook kept a notebook in his locker. And one day, a man in a worn leather jacket walked through the front door and ordered a cheeseburger. And the loan was called back all at once, with everything compounded. That is how it works. Treat people well when they think you do not matter. Treat them well when you know they do not matter to your career. Treat them well when nobody is watching. Especially then. Because somebody is always watching. Even when you cannot see them. Even when they are picking up cup lids. Thank you for following this story. Let us know in the comments below. If this story has moved you, and you'd like to stand with us in bringing more voices of truth and hope to light, please consider supporting our work. Even the smallest gift helps us continue creating and sharing these powerful stories. You can find the donate link in the description. And, of course, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next chapter. We're preparing for you.